Well, Zaman. Good morning. Let's see. Can you hear me? It works? Okay, great. Well, then, good morning again, everyone. Here, I don't know, online as well, I suppose. I've been given the great honor of just saying a few introductory words. I'll keep it brief because I don't think you're here to listen to me. But I want to welcome you all to this seminar on inclusive education in developing countries, building pathways for inclusive futures. It is a pleasure to be hosting this event in collaboration with our partners at Fafo here in Norway. And it's great to see so many people here as well. I would also like to extend our gratitude to the other contributing partners, OsloMet, the Atlas Alliance, and Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. As many of you know, or all of you know, the global vision for inclusive education was set forth in the Salamanca Statement of '94 and reinforced again in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Despite significant progress, millions of children, particularly those with disabilities, remain out of school or are not receiving an educational offer adapted to their challenges and to their needs. Strengthening inclusive education remains a cornerstone for our work in Norad. It is a priority that cuts across all our partnerships and all our dealings with partners. From recent research conducted by OsloMet and others, we know that there is often a very stark contrast between policies and practice. Most countries have ratified international conventions and established legal frameworks at national level for inclusive education. But translating these commitments into effective classroom strategies for teaching and learning for those children with disabilities and various needs remains a challenge. Issues such as teacher preparedness, accessibility, and societal attitudes often create barriers to true inclusion. The importance of locally responsive approaches is essential but challenging, and often not incorporated into effective teaching and learning strategies. So, we believe this event will be a very valuable platform to reflect on the latest knowledge and also the knowledge gaps that we know exists, and exchange ideas on how to bridge the gap between aspiration and action, policies and practices at country level. It is a key priority for us here in Norad to support research. Evidence-driven policies and actions are the foundation for meaningful and sustainable change, and Norad remains committed to be a global lead in this effort. As we approach the Global Disability Summit in 2025, today's event presents a timely platform for understanding, dialogue, and innovation. And we're very proud to have assembled so many authorities on inclusive education here today. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. So let me just conclude by saying it is our goal here in Norad, and as I'm sure amongst many of our partners, not just to have inclusive education as a policy goal, but as a lived reality for children and youth worldwide. Thank you very much.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Thomas, for the overview and setting the stage for us today. And good morning, everyone. My name is Theodor Skabel. I'm a researcher at Fafo. It's my privilege to serve as your moderator today as we explore inclusive education and the pathways to building more equitable futures. This seminar is structured into to provide a kind of logical flow through key themes. The first one would be, in the first session, we'll have what we call knowledge production and empirical findings. We'll begin with presentations that highlight research and insights on inclusive education systems and their challenges, including also theoretical approaches and reflections on identity and other related issues. After the break, we will return to innovative practices and solutions implemented on the ground, showcasing the intersection of research and real-world applications. And finally, in the last part of the seminar today, we'll hear about future directions and engage in a dynamic, hopefully very participatory, interactive panel discussion with experts representing diverse perspectives. So to begin, we'll hear from our colleague, Serena Mahamadou, National Vice President of the Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations. And in this video, we'll hear that Serena shares key challenges and opportunities for inclusive education from the perspective of what we call the Global South. Please.
Good morning. My name is Bård, the National Vice President of Ghana Federation of Disability Organization, GNT. I'm very happy to call upon to speak on the topic. The critical challenges of inclusive education from the perspective of persons with disability in developing countries. On the theme of our conference, Voice from the South, Key Challenges and Opportunities. This provides a very important opportunity for me to talk about the challenges that persons with disabilities face in developing countries. I would like to talk about the inclusive education based on certain areas: supply, quality, demand, enabling environments. So let's talk about supply. When we talk about the supply, we are looking at the initial supply of teachers to various institutions. With the inclusive education, most teachers in developing countries are not trained in inclusive education, leading to the problem of most of them not knowing how to include children with special needs properly in their various classrooms, leading to the children being left out in the way they handle them in the classroom, and then neglecting most children with special needs when they are found in the mainstream classrooms. There is also a problem with pedagogical supports. Most schools, because of lack of enough staff in developing countries, most schools need a lack support staff that will handle children with special needs, and this leads to the problem that most children who go into the mainstream schools lack that support, and they only pass through the educational system, not getting the right educational support that will help them bring out their best in the classroom. Then we also have infrastructure. The infrastructure to most classrooms are not disability friendly. There are no ramps. The spaces between the classroom, the walkways are not disability friendly, making movement very difficult for children with special needs. And then at the same time, too, the teaching and learning materials in the classroom are not friendly enough to cater for the children with special needs. We are also looking at the playgrounds and the washrooms, which are not also accessible for children with special needs. And this leads to the children being left out in the school setting. We also look at the teaching and learning materials. Most schools don't have Braille, they don't have digital teaching and learning materials that are specifically designed to cater for special needs of children with disabilities, making those children in the mainstream schools to be denied certain privileges that their brothers and sisters without disability get. Most textbooks in our schools in the developing countries are in the print form and are not even bold enough or large enough. The fonts are very small, and this actually leave children with low vision out because they are not able to read the prints, which are usually very small. And those that can read through with the prints too, they also have challenges because some cannot even see, so they need audio. And then others also need some other kind of video learning materials, teaching and learning materials, which are readily not available in most of our developing countries. And when we look at the quality, the curriculum that they normally develop in most developing countries don't take into consideration the needs of children with learning difficulties, especially children with disabilities. The most developing countries neglect the needs and they don't assess their needs when developing new curriculum to cater for the teaching and learning of persons with disability. We also look at the flexibility and adaptability of the assessment system that we use in the schools. There's kind of standardized way of assessing all children in the classroom actually doesn't cater for children with special needs. Some children are slow learners, others are also very fast. But it so happens that most developing countries have the same standard way of assessing all children, which is not right because it ends up neglecting people with special needs, and this does not help children with special needs to be able to cope with the educational system. We are looking at the referral, screening and referral system. Most developing countries don't have the facilities or the personnel that goes around to assess children when they are young to know their needs, where they can identify their disability at a very early age that will enable them to assess them and get them the right things that they need or where they should be placed or the kind of attention they need to be able to get involved in the learning process effectively. And this actually affects their learning and teaching negatively. Then we also have lack of assistive devices in most of the public schools in developing countries. The kind of assistive devices that is to be adapted to the individual's needs are not available in this developing country, and those that are even available are very expensive that most parents and learners with disability are not able to afford, and this leads to their poor participation in the teaching and learning system. That most parents, when they go to assess the educational system, some parents are denied the privilege of getting their children to schools that are nearby them because most educators don't have the facilities in their school, and because of that, they are afraid to admit those children with special needs, thereby neglecting them or rejecting them outright, which affects their learning negatively, meaning that most of these children should have to travel very far away from their parents to access education.
Okay, thank you so much, Serena, for sharing these critical reflections. I think what we have heard from Serena is really about the experiences on the ground for children that have difficulties from supply, demand, as she has described it, and covering also a number of aspects related to also social, cultural practices. And these are issues that we will continue to grapple with during our morning session today. And the first session focused on, as I mentioned earlier, about knowledge production and empirical findings, exploring diverse methodologies and their implications for advancing inclusive education. This session will explore and provide both quantitative and qualitative approaches and perspectives, also giving us or shedding light on how research methods and researchers' identity shape the field. First, I think we'll welcome Huafeng Bang, a researcher at Fafo, who will present a quantitative analysis of the educational landscape for children with disabilities in Africa. Huafeng's work uses data-driven methods to highlight critical challenges and opportunities for advancing inclusive education systems. Next, after Huafeng, we'll have both Rolf Bjarne Fasting and Rune Hofstetter from Oslo Met and Head of Department of the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences. They will discuss inclusive education strategies based on their recent review work and other works that they do, focusing on the complexities of implementing these frameworks in low-income settings. And finally, in this session, we will hear from Anne Kielland, also a researcher at Fafo, who reflect on the role of researcher identity in disability research, particularly when one does research in the Global South. Anna's presentation will delve into how positionality, empathy, and cultural context influence knowledge production and the decolonization of disability research. So we'll be covering a broad theme of, both academia and also more applied focused issues in these three presentations. And let's begin with Huafeng Zhang, and Huafeng, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Today, I'm going to present some of the findings from our experience in one of our Fafo's projects in Ghana and Niger. But at the same time, I would also like to present some of the findings from some really large-scale secondary data, which also point to some issues in this study. So today's presentation, I actually would like to pose three questions. I don't really have answers to these questions, but our findings probably give some input to these questions and for further discussion. Oh, sorry. And my first question comes to how much do we understand children's functional difficulties? This is through our Fafo's survey. This is a Research Council project, which we call AVID, Educational Outcome Variability in Children with Disabilities. With this project, we had organized 2 rounds of survey in Ghana and Niger. And we select children with and without disabilities in inclusive schools in 2 countries. And then we ask their parents and teachers to fill the Washington Group's Children Functional Form. And what is Children Functional Form? That was a tool that has been under a large number of years of effort developed by the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. They have developed several different types of tools, but the one that we have referred to is this Washington Group's Child Functional Form. And they have 2 versions, one for the young under 5 children, and the other one is for the bit older children. So the one we used was the one that was 5 to 17 age. And they have also both teacher and parents versions, so for teacher parents to report their functional difficulties. And our survey have 2 rounds. And first of all, we start with a mapping access. So we go to the schools and ask the teachers to fill this child functional form for all the children in the class. And finally, we collect about 4,000 children's information from Ghana and 5,000 from Niger. And based on this information, we select children for interview. Half are children with disability and half without. And then 1 month later, we did a round of survey. And also include in that survey, we include this same child function module in the household questionnaire, so that parents can also report with exactly the same questionnaire sets to reply to the children's functional difficulties. And 1 year later, we come back to these children, ask their teachers and the parents to fill in the same form again about their functional difficulties. And then that means we collected 4 rounds of evaluation on children's functions. And then when we collect this, we set some of definition, because that is the challenge with the quantitative study with disabilities study, because disability is a complex issue and there's no cutting point, but you have to do some cutting when you want to report in the quantitative side. So here we make a certain definition that we include some of the function domains when they report as not at all or lot of difficulty in these functions, and they were classified as children with disability. And we also include some of the sensory and the physical functions as some difficulty, also include them as the children with disability. Then based on this same definition across 4 evaluations, and we look at same children, right? So finally we find 1/3 of the children has not been reported as any functional difficulties across all the 4 evaluations. Another 1/3 were reported once. And then we have about 10–50% were reported 3 or 4 times. So apparently there are some inconsistencies across these evaluations. And then if we come closer and look at households reports, so we compare what were reported from parents 1 year before and 1 year after, they're about, if you look at the red numbers, they're about 30–40%. They disagree with each other across a year. When we compare the teachers' reports, it's also 1 year between from the teachers, same, I mean, across two countries, about 30 to 40%, they disagree with each other. And then finally, we compare parents and the teacher at the same time in the second round. Again, about 30%. The teacher and parent disagree with each other. So this kind of disagreement or inconsistencies are kind of quite persistent across different persons across time. So we are thinking about what might have caused this kind of differences of evaluation on the same child. Was it because of the timing? Children were developing, so they are changing. Their functions also changing over time. And does it matter who we ask? Is it parents that we are asking, or it's teacher? Because they are observing child from different angles, and they see that their difficulties in different aspects when they are learning or when they are doing housework. Does it matter that how we ask? Because the first data collection were basically ask teacher to fill in the form. Well, there are a large number of children in the class, so they are filling by themselves after some simple training from us. But then later on, the next household and teacher surveys, we have our interviews sitting in front and go through question by question with the parents and teacher. And it doesn't matter who asks. So we did the training with our interviewer, but it still varies a bit how they pose the question and how they explain what it means with these questions. So these are some challenges with this tool, but it doesn't mean that this doesn't work. I mean, this does really work very well with to collect a huge amount of information from large number of children and over a lot of countries. And this is not easy work. And we also know that the disability itself is a difficult question. But the only thing that we need to be aware of is that what kind of information we get and how do we interpret them. The one thing that I didn't cover here, if you see that when I include domains, we only, sorry, maybe I shouldn't go back. We only include some of the function domains because there's 12 function domains included in the child function model, but I only select some. Why? Because, for example, this anxiety and depression, when I look at the many countries' reports, there are a huge variety. So it's maybe local context also matters. So there's a lot of questions that we pose to this, hopefully that we can understand. So I don't have answer yet, but hopefully that we can know better. My second question, is there a gap for the children with disability in school performing or in learning skills? And does the social economic improvements will closing that gap or not? This study is based on the, as I said, secondary large-scale data that has been collected by mixed survey organized by UNICEF. And they have done the surveys in over 100 countries by using the same Washington Group child functional module. In addition, they also include a standardized numeracy and reading test. A quick word for the test they used. That is, they have two sets of reading tests, but what I have picked is only the reading test for older kids that between 10 to 14 years. So they are giving a paragraph of a small story and then pose several questions. That's the reading test. And numeracy test, that's for all the children between 7 to 14. And that's also very, there are 21 questions. And how many questions they have answered correctly, averagely, among children between 7 to 14. So they are actually, some children are really, really large. And then if you look at some country like DRC Congo, the percentage is amazingly low. And the reading test is the second column present how many the percent of children that has reached certain level of reading skills. That means they generally understand the text and can read about 90% of the word and can answer most of the questions. Then that's also quite low among the children between 10 to 14. So these are children who are supposed to be in school for some years already. And then if you compare, I mean, the gross enrollment in most of these countries has been over 100 or around 100. And then, except 2 countries that have relatively low in net enrollment, most of the countries also reached 90 and over 90% of net enrollment, and the primary completion is also good in most of the countries. But in some countries like DRC Congo, even though the primary completion rate is quite high, but their reading skill and numeracy is really basic. So what happened then in this background? What happened to our children with disability? How they are learning? So what I look at is their different, I mean, their performance based on these 2 reading and the numeracy skills. What are the gap between children with and without disabilities? For the numeracy skills, I divide these 8 countries into 2 groups. So one group has relatively higher, generally higher numeracy skills, one has lower numeracy skills. So in the left side, this is the countries with low numeracy skills, and the right side is high. So generally the children, I look at children with non-disabled, physical, intellectual, or multiple, 3 types of disabilities. So generally all the children in the high numeracy schools perform better than the low numeracy countries. And the interesting is, if you look at the most challenging group of disabled children in the high numeracy countries, they are performing better even than the non-disabled children in low numeracy schools. So that means the improvement in the general learning quality do benefit also the children with disability. However, within the group, there's always a persistent gap between the children with and without disability, which is something that we have to work on. And similarly, with the reading skill, I divide them into 3 groups. So low, middle, and high reading skill countries. Again, generally, they improve together, but there's persistent gap within the group. And finally, I divide them into social groups. So there are 3 social groups here. First of all, urban-rural. Urban children are doing better than rural children. And household income, high-income families, the children are doing better. And children in the families with well-educated parents. So you see the patterns overall, but within group, there's the gap. And no matter whether they are in the good, high-income or well-educated families, they're not able to solve this issue, and they're not being able to reduce this gap, no matter which group they're in. So this is something that is really that we should work on in inclusive education. So what we should do? What we should help them in the inclusive? It's not simply just put them in the classroom. This doesn't help. So my last question: what factors shape the quality of inclusive education? And that is really a big question that I couldn't answer. But I hope that our research could bring some elements there. Here, also based on our survey in Ghana and Niger, and I'm looking at just one small factor, and that's this class size. So what I do here, well, in our survey, we collected the school record from school. So the school report, basically the annual school scores that in the 3 major subjects of the children. And then I compare between children with and without disability. And these stars means the difference are statistically significant. If there's no star, so this difference is not statistically different. So in this here is the class size. So in the small class size, in the small classes, there's small differences between children with and without difficulty in their school performance. When the class size increase, it's huge difference between the children with and without disabilities. It's increased to over 60% difference. So the class size does matter. And I believe there are many other factors that we can work on. But at least for this, just a small piece of the message is that, well, in the larger classes, the children with disability has much larger challenges than other. And also, for the based on the class size information, we also look at teachers' attitudes and how that influences their attitudes towards teaching children with disabilities. So there's a bunch of questions we ask: how they are confident in teaching children with disabilities, and whether they have enough time or skills or energies to teaching them. And the dark green bars are those teachers in classes with under 30 children, and the light green bars are teachers from the classes that's 60 above. This is the data from Niger. So that's a huge difference between teachers' attitudes in teaching the children with disabilities. So class size also matters for how that influences teachers. So this is the most of So I hope that this could be a starting point of really going to the local context and see what really can help the inclusive education. So that's the thing that I would like to present today. But I hope it's a starting point, and we could further discussing. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hofan. Can you hear me? Perhaps. Maybe now? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been very interesting. She's given us a highlight in terms of definitions on how we measure, that matters, and also in terms of how this consistent, persistent differential or disparity between non-disabled and disabled children, and finally also on some of the key factors such as class size, attitudes of teachers, and how they conduct their teaching and practices matters when it comes to outcomes for children with disabilities. Next would be, without taking much of the time, I would invite both Rona and Rolf. The floor is yours.
That's okay? It's okay?
Now, perhaps.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just to comment on the two previous, I learned from a colleague from Sri Lanka 2 days ago a new word, new phrase, new concept, the ecology of inclusive education. I think that's the previous have been about, and that's what we also are going to talk about. World Fasting, coming from Oslo Met, I'm together with Rune Hostet from the IN University. We are going to report on the on something that's showing up. Okay, just thank you. Oh, thank you. On the assignment we got from Norad, short version, try to find the approach of inclusive education in a selection of low-income countries. And I want to thank Norad for the assignment. It's really interesting for us to use this possibility to both make into the discussion in Norway but also internationally. So that's what we think. And also I'm to give my regards from Bård, which is in Sri Lanka these days, so she couldn't join us. Okay, in the presentation we will try to have these four focus. Look at the main focus in the literature we have reviewed, look at some models of inclusive education, enablers as driver and also as barriers to inclusive education, and then finally we want to put on the floor, zoom out and look at what kind of dilemma do aid work in education, especially inclusive education, in promote when we are looking through the glasses of coloniality. I think that would be really, really interesting. Okay, just to summarize, I won't bother you on this because this is part of being a researcher. The focus we got was to explore the global vision of inclusive education, how that was understood at the national, local and in schools, and then to identify some of the enablers challenges regarding the implementation of inclusive education in 6 countries in Africa, as you see in the map, in Palestine and also in Africa, Afghanistan, Nepal and Myanmar. Really low finding of papers on Palestine and summarize the findings for the report are on the first page on the page of the slide, so you can go back if you want. To summarize the findings, there are some key elements that are in coherence, at least to the first presentation we had this morning. The one is that the literature focused to a large degree on access and adaptation for children with adaptation access. Only a few of the publications discussed how school facilitates education, teaching strategies, or the education needs of the children. Secondly, a key concern is the coherence between national strategies and educational sector plans and the school and the classroom's practices. So it's a huge gap between the national framework ideology, budget allocation, class size, teaching age, teacher room, and autonomy to adapt and make actions, as also we heard. The schools and the teacher are more or less tied up in the national expectation and curriculum regulation, and sometimes pushing children with disability out of school. And thirdly, according to the publication, teacher education and training do not, in a sufficient degree, qualify teachers to teach students with disability. The concerns is on the classroom management, subject differentiation, and the use of aids, as we also heard of this morning. And lastly, the literature stresses the need for in-service education for school leaders and teachers to build competencies on inclusive education. So this is the last message about in-service training is some recommendations echoed through all the papers we have reviewed. We also try to respond to the question with what models are in use, and I will also try to summarize that in the next minutes. And we identified mainly 4 different models, which are not specifically for these areas. We can find that more around the whole world, I think. The first is the most common way, which we identified in those publication, was to refer to inclusive education for children with disabilities just by placing them in the classroom, without any kind of adaptation, either they're blind or deaf, and with really low or perhaps no expectation at all regarding their learning outcome. This is from more or less the teacher perspectives. The second was the support center model, with an itinerant teacher visiting the center satellite schools regularly. A core element is that in the interaction between the itinerant teacher and the class teacher, both on counseling on assistive devices, learning aids, but also in the matter of collaboration. And that kind of collaboration were reported that initiated a kind of shift in the teacher's attitudes and teaching knowledge from viewing the class as a homogeneous unit to recognize more that pupils have different needs and also different abilities. So the third model we identified was the integrated school model, which you probably are familiar with, most of you, which are some kind of groups, segregated groups within the organization of a mainstream school, mostly targeting visual or auditory disabilities, impairments. These are also special, for the most, at least they have some connection with some special teacher, and they have a special resources designed for the children's needs. And the last model is the special school model, which with their own administrative structure, not closely connected to any mainstream school or public school, often run by private organizations, foreign organizations, and this school usually admits children with moderate and severe disabilities. And there are no ambition of including the children into mainstream schooling. So that's more or less the models we found. And you probably know most of them. And then I will look to some domain-specific concerns and enablers before we An essential factor in building knowledge and competency of school leaders and teachers on inclusive education is to access and address the challenges they perceive and are at hand, but also the attitudes, the prejudices, and the misconceptions that we read about. And some of these are undesirable attitudes regarding disabled teens based on both low expectation but also on superstitions. It was clearly stated in a lot of the reports. And these we find all the way from the state level down to the teacher in the classroom and also as well in society. Finally, concerns are raised whether national strategies adequately support the development of the teacher competency for inclusive education. And that gap has to be closed. I have to hurry up. Accessibility concerns, travel, no transport, as you know. School infrastructure is a problem, whether access to classroom and making ramps are the significant thing. And also violence and harassment, especially for girls who are subjected to sexual harassment, and the boy more to corporal. There are some enablers, and I have no time to go into it. I just want you to read the report because I want to lead the floor for Runa.
Yes, thank you, Rolf. What I'm going to talk about was really not part of the task we were given, but at least it became something that I thought was very interesting to look into and to raise the awareness around. And that's the idea or the possibility of inclusion as being part of coloniality. Inclusion as a concept is a good concept. We look at it as something good. And when we connect something good together with money, it becomes a very powerful tool for creating change. And that's the possibility of creating something wrong with this mix between money and inclusion is clearly there. And first of all, inclusion started as an idea directed towards children or people with disability, but today we can see that it is used as a general concept. And what I can see when reading, especially the donor organizations' documents, is that in that competition of money, children with disability loses when they use the word of inclusion towards gender, poverty, and race. So inclusion is used in all these concepts, but you very seldom see it connected to disability, especially. It's also a very trendy concept. So every nation that wants to have money needs to use the word inclusion in their policy documents without really knowing what it is when they start to put it into the policy documents. And as I said, a lot of researchers from the donor organizations are, in a way, using the word as a trendy word for creating or something that is not really good described as a change. A bit about coloniality. What we saw is in a way, the power of being when we're in this concept. It is not any clear distinction between the Western idea of doing education and the countries we looked into on what is good education in their countries. So inclusion could be used as a way of presenting Western ideas clearly Western ideas into other countries' school policies and school practice without really reflecting on the national level. Coloniality of knowledge. The results that Rolf presented is mainly based on Western researchers' research in the 10 countries we looked into. So what we saw was that more or less inclusive research has become, in these countries, has become a playground for Western researchers. Very few of the research we found was developed from a national level. And that's also something to implement in a way Western ideas into the countries we were looking at. And the idea of power is that inclusion is sold as a cheap way of supporting children with disabilities, and that is a criticized perspective. It's not very cheap to create an inclusive society. The first presenter really emphasized it, but in a way class size is an important measurement. and that's not impossible to solve without money or resources. So that is, I will not go much more into it. We have there some ideas about how to solve it in the document, but that's a very big challenge, how to, in a way, get away from this coloniality aspect when dealing with the challenge of inclusive education. So very fast, you can read more about it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bård and Rob. We'll continue the conversation later on. Please, Anne Shelland, also continuing some of these tips that we have heard from Rune last. The floor is yours, Anna.
My presentation? Okay. So hi everybody. I'm absolutely stoked about the two first presentations. Yesterday I was a bit worried that the panel wouldn't, or this session wouldn't be well tied together. It's going to be super well tied together. Especially happy about you bringing up the colonial aspect, which I will do too. My presentation is about knowledge production in the qualitative field, and the title is Too Close, Too Far, Does It Matter Who We Are, the people who produce this knowledge? And I think it really ties into some very essential questions that Hua Fong asked about the quantitative knowledge production. Asking different people, you get different answers. Being different people asking, you probably do too. It's not unique for Africa. It happens in Norway too. We work with disability indicators with Statistics Norway. They have exactly the same issues. This is not a plain field. So we will look into how who we are changes the knowledge production, and we'll definitely get back to the decolonizing thing in my last slides. How may who we are, I'm going to do what we call academic karaoke here. It's partly to help the translators to know what we're doing. So the scientific ideal in many ways is disinterestedness and a skeptical distance to the people, the research participants. We're also supposed to have methods and theories that help other people be able to reproduce the research that, the letters are really, really small. Something happened in the it's not supposed to look like that.
Yeah.
I can hardly read it on my screen either, so it's kind of... Is there a way to get full screen here? Because I can...
I'm not sure.
Okay. You can get this full screen, maybe there. Okay, they were not small. Okay, we'll try. Yes, from the qualitative field, we know that who we are definitely influences on what we ask about, how we observe, how we process, and how we address and analyze the data that we produce. So one of the things I want to draw on from disability research is this issue of empathy. It comes from neurodiversity research recently. And it has to do with how we as persons meet the research participants. And in this disability research, we operate with two levels of empathy. Perhaps a little bit foreign concept to academia, but we are empathetic at two levels. Oh, and now it's not synced with what I see. Okay, so this is not moving well. So at the first level of empathy, it's cognitive. Cognitive empathy is based on shared experiences. Basically that when I interview someone who have shared experiences with myself as an African researcher doing research at home, as a disabled researcher doing research with another disabled person, they will have some shared experiences. And that will help them understand context. And we think it's normally a blessing because it helps you to do both more constructive approaches, you'd be more flexible, you can improve interpretation, accuracy will be better, and the relevance of the research is potentially better. Now, the empathy issue is not only cognitive, it's also affective. And when you understand the person better from a cognitive perspective, you're also more likely to reflect that person from an affective perspective. You can feel, you more easily mirror what that person feels. So the capability of have an emotional reaction mirroring the person you speak with is an effective part of empathy. In academia, that can be a challenge. It can be a challenge because it challenges this idea of skeptical distance. On the other hand, the opposite can also be a problem. Oh my God, is this going to go through the presentation? Because sometimes when you have an emotional distance, you will also get this unempathetic and objectifying way to talk about the other. I'm going to report on kind of a weird study. It's part of the same project that Hwafang worked on, EVID, where we did qualitative interviews with families with children with disabilities who were still in school. It's a positive deviance approach to studying school attendance in disabled children. The people who went into the field came from 4 different countries. It was Hwafang and myself, a researcher from Niger, and a researcher from Ghana. And we were supervised by Don Firun Mankaila from the Disability Association in Niger, and Sirina, who you met this morning from the Disability Organization in Ghana. We were different. We had different identities. We had different genders, different religions, came from different disciplinary backgrounds, and we had some very different work experiences, taking it with us into the field. And the process of this was that we first met up with the big team. This is the same photo you may notice from Hwafang's presentation. Then the 4 of us went to the field to do the same household interviews in Ghana, then in Niger. We started out in the schools, talking with the teachers of each of these children that we were going to visit later on. Then went to their homes, talked with their families, interviewed as a group. And when we came home, a researcher from SINTEF conducted individual interviews with each one of us after coming back from Ghana, after coming back from Niger. So basically I transcribed, these were 8 interviews altogether, and I started coding. And the objective was to see how did we differ in the observations of observing the same places. And the first observation is that we're all really perceptive, we're super good at describing things, we describe things accurately and in the very same way. But when we start interpreting the data, the differences start to show. The first obvious issue is that we understand disability very differently, both when it comes to classifications, functional classification, and also when it comes to balancing this medical and social approach to disability. The second, of course, was that the local researcher in each country would have a much better cognitive empathy or cognitive capacity to contextualize what we saw and understand better. And the third one was that may have or may triggered also the effective empathy in that local researcher. As a consequence, we ended up predicting the prospects of each of these children in extremely different directions. And I'm going to just have 2 examples, and the letters are ridiculously small, and maybe I'll turn my back a little bit and read here because I can't read here. So first, the first household was in Niger. There was a 7-year-old boy. He was intellectually disabled, classified by the Washington Group Standard. And but then again, the team didn't understand his disability in the same way. Myself, I said, oh, this is intellectual. It was a birth defect. The boy didn't have oxygen during birth. Yes, he has behavioral issues, but that's because he's frustrated. Hwafang said, it's kind of hard to say what is psychological and intellectual here. I could anyway not see how he could learn anything in that environment. Evelyn, who was the African researcher from the neighboring country in this case, said, oh, but there is improvement. His hyperactivity can improve by time. This boy can do well in the future. And Jakuba, who was the local researcher interviewing the father, said, oh, this is mainly speech and behavioral problems. He aligned with the father's recount. He said others in his family have caught up. He's much improving from his aggression problems now. This boy can become normal. So how come we are sitting with this very different perception of the same child, having been doing research in the same community? And I'm thinking that Jakuba's closeness to this culture made him understand a lot easier what the situation was about. Yet, normal? Hwafang and I were both skeptical. Hwafang said this father is in denial. about the impairment of this child. I totally agreed. Later on, we have started to discuss, but what is normal? What does normal mean in a high-tech society as ours? What does normal mean there? Maybe it simply means that he can get a job assisting someone in a workshop by the time that's normal enough. The second case is from Ghana, and the letters are bigger. I'm great to see that. Here, we also had very different perceptions about the family situation and the prospects of the boy. This boy was classified again from the Washington Group questionnaire with the cognitive or an intellectual impairment. And my initial concern in this family was the evident violence that was executed by the mother during the interview. And I was not very concerned with his intellect. I was more concerned that he may have a vision problem. This is how he was writing. I also thought maybe ADHD or simply trauma because of all the beating. Fafo was also a little bit surprised about the beating. She said, you know, I've seen that before, but not when people watch. And still, look at this boy. He's sitting still on a desk all through the interview. That's very impressive. I wouldn't even expect that from my children or from myself, you commented. Jakuba, now in the neighboring country, said, this mother needs a more stable family situation. A lot of the problem is that the father doesn't want to marry her. He is uncertain on how it will go with this boy as long as the family situation around him was stable. So the solution in his regard was to get his father to marry the mother and stabilize the family around him. Evelyn, who's the local reporter, says, now this mother is very supportive. She's helping with homework. He can learn. So we have very different approaches to assessing the situation. Now, what is the implication? I'm going back to the coloniality issue here. Because is it so that researchers from the global north necessarily will enforce colonial knowledge production when we go there and do our research? On the contrary, is it so that researchers from the global south will necessarily reproduce or produce decolonized knowledge? Now, there's a double colonization debate going on here, which is about able-bodied researchers researching disabled people. So could we in the same way assume that non-disabled researchers necessarily will keep producing knowledge that is fitted to controlling the narrative of disabled people? And the opposite, is it so that necessarily disabled researchers will produce decolonized disability knowledge? It's a lot about the research tools, which is a central issue in the colonizing and decolonizing debate. Oh, no.
We click on. It's okay.
Okay, this is supposed to be a circumflex model. A circumflex model has two dimensions. This line is, of course, supposed to be vertical. So there are two dimensions. One has to do with the socio-cultural distance between the researcher and the research participants. It can be very close. It can be very far. The other has to do with the research tools you use. What methods? Where do these methods come from? Do they come from the global north? The tools, the research tools, methods, theories. So in a circumflex model, if you are a researcher from the global north and you only use research tools that you bring with you from the global north, yes, likelihood is pretty high that you are going to keep reproducing, colonizing knowledge. Now, if you are a researcher from the global south, but you're educated in Britain or in France, all the theories and tools you learn were from there, and you bring them down there and you replicate them there. Likelihood is pretty big that you're going to reproduce some of the colonizing knowledge. Now, a researcher from the global north, of course, can ameliorate by trying to adapt some of the local research production tools and frameworks where they are. Where they are not, they really need to involve with the OPDs and the disability movements to get informed, to correct, and not be stuck in their approaches. And we can also imagine that researchers from the sociocultural proximity to the research participants can produce this type of knowledge, locally informed. The end to this, yes, that's supposed to be in the middle of the in the section, is that we do believe that this project showed that it had a value in producing some self-reflective critical research collaboration, where actually each team member added something interesting to the team, and the discussions that emerged in the team were also extremely critical as correctives to ourselves and very helpful in discovering our own biases. Yeah.
Thank you. Great, thank you so much. It's been a deep dive into a number of issues. Perhaps we can take a bit of a pause now to reflect on what we've heard for the next 10 minutes. Coffee, refreshments. Please continue to think about the issues that has been raised. Maybe you have questions. We'll have ample time in the last session to raise questions to the presenters. So, but let's take a 12-13 minutes break and resume in about 10-15, please. Coffee.
Ja, fy søren. Alle er jo ulike på meg.
Dere sammen.
Litt ekstra sånn jeg sier, jeg sier ikke Robin. Jeg prøvde, men ja.
It's also given me an opportunity to try to put everything together, because I haven't tried to do that. No, and that's
And this goes also for you. It will be very helpful. Du ser at they will be more or less, yeah, I guess, a lot of elements. It's no snakker jeg.
Men det mer så wow, man kan inte klippa
Noen på.
Vi er jo veldig ålreit.
Ja,
Ikke sant, vi sjekker nå.
Vi sjekker nå, men jeg tror altså, det var noe med formateringen som gjorde at så godt jeg kunne. Men du vet, utdanning er viktig, så da går du bedre.
Vi sjekker nå at de her...
Ja. Det er jo ikke noe gøy når ting kommer på skjermen som ikke var...
Jeg tenkte så bare
Vil du se? Fordi de...
Ikke sant? Ja.
Han gjør det også godt.
Måtte skrive navnet, så jeg var sikker på at jeg ikke studerer det her.
Jeg kan ha det noe bokstav.
Det var så bra, da.
Fantastisk.
Hei, eller? Hei. Takk for.
Gjør ikke det nå, for da får vi ikke... Og det her, vi har en klipp.
Takk for.
Jeg skal løpe ikke der.
Nei, vel helst.
Ja, men det
Jeg bare
Viktig.
sitter jeg der, så jeg løper opp meg hvis det skjer noe.
Ja, det er nivst.
Ja, så klart. Så har jeg den her. Så ser den sånn ut nå, og jeg har den i en mappe. Hvis dere oppdager nå teksten her ikke var like.
Det er lagt til ett ord. Jeg har lyst til at det skal stå noe der, så jeg ikke glemmer det.
Men vi fikk
I didn't even know Ellen up there. Så bra. Ja, det meg. Hei.
Veldig fint. Jeg så imponert for at alle har holdt tid.
Ja.
Er det veldig dårlig?
Ja, ikke sant.
Jeg skal gå for meg mikrofonen.
Det vet jeg ikke, det er sant.
Men det Så jeg må se det på ulike
Fine, I don't know.
I think he's more than ever.
Jeg vet det.
Ja, det er nok noe annet, ja.
No, but he is
Seeing the numbers,
kind of like
the reporting is
just to learn
very different.
Sitter på fly over, høres.
In many settings, I used to work the same.
Psykologen så det kan jo være.
Ja, vi gjorde så godt vi kunne. Over at ikke vi kunne. Altså, du har invitert gang på gang på gang. Og vi er jo ikke til stede. Men jeg har fått spørsmålet, jeg leste gjennom, og vi er forberedt til det. Kanskje begge to?
Det bestemmer nok. Det som er praktisk.
Vi kan bytte stol også. Det kan vi gjøre, vet du.
Det kan kaffe.
Jeg beklager mye at ikke vi... For jeg synes at det hva jeg kan få masterstudenter. Jeg har også vært i Stockholm, Oslo Airport for Oslo, og vi måtte sitte der. Vel, altså, det er våknet. Det går bra. Ja, det er veldig bra.
I also noted down that it's like
En av oss eller bruker den? Ja, blir så bruker den helst det er lurt for meg
That was there also some
Nei, det er
så vil jeg
Where in Lebanon?
Trying to remember, I have the US based, it's from US, because it has a capital in Niger. I have a very bad memory. I have
It's always interesting.
ja, selvfølgelig.
It's a long time.
Ja, men det vet jeg. Tenker ikke å lese. Da skal jeg spørre litt. Skal jeg
I can maintain himself if he gets it.
Ja vel. Åja, ja da.
Ønsker deg lykke til.
Takk.
Det var ikke
Gikk du her? Var litt her. Jeg er litt nervøs.
brukt opp Lillehammer senere.
Det er fordi det er en annen her inne. En helt annen person. Da er jeg ikke på samme måte som gira, men jeg er mer nervøs nå.
Fikk e-post fra nå at du hadde tegnet kontrakt videre, så
Ja, men what's on your own? Det er kjekt. På egen risk. Det har jeg tenkt på.
ja, bra det.
For jeg føler at det er veldig basert på
Ja, men det var flott. Alt dette her er han sammen.
Ja.
mye fokusmenn på sammen.
Elise,
Bergen du holder til?
Jeg har gått av med pensjon. Det er bare jeg skal gjøre det. Det er jo kjekt.
Ja,
Eller måneder.
jeg gikk på Ærskolen i
Hvis du betalte så
90-tallet.
190 kroner. Nå må jeg vise dere bilder etterpå.
Det var ikke der.
Vi må ha en liten egentlig sånn.
Men du holder til.
Ja.
Du sa jo han er jo
Ja da, hun var her inne. Hun hadde en 20% stilling i fjor, og så har hun permisjon, så hun var jo med selv om hun var en treårig kontrakt. Ja, vel. Hun valgte ikke være der nå.
Det var skikkelig på
Ikke nok med det som er i verden.
Det var det jeg kan ikke si noe.
Hun hadde noen master.
Ja, har det...
Man blir veldig påbegynt av penger med det var 30 hver dag.
Pedagogisk minister der. Hun og jeg, vi har kampert
Ja vel, ja.
ting sammen.
Jeg lurer på om jeg skulle begynne.
Det er kjekt. Det har vært veldig bra.
Ja, det går bra nå frem til en sånn 12-1. Ja, da begynner jeg å bli trøtt igjen, men nå går det greit. 4-45. Har sin egen tidsrytme.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a bit of refreshing and reflective break. And now I think we now transition to our second sessions. What we've heard so far had been pretty much about knowledge, what we know, how do we conduct research, measurement issues. Also a bit of, even if it seems or it sounds a bit academic, but relevant discussion on coloniality that we'll resume later on. But we now transition to the second one, which highlights applied practices and innovative solutions. So this session will explore case studies and methodologies that bring inclusive education to life. So I will start. First, we'll hear from Gunvor Birkeland Wilhelmsen, who will present her work on vision-related teacher training in Tanzania, showcasing the intersection of research and practice in addressing visual challenges in classrooms. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all those who have been talking before me, because I think everything is very good connected and very interesting. So yes, we are going to look into how we have been building competence in vision for Tanzanian teachers. It is really two projects in a way, because they are hanging much together. But first of all, why functioning on vision and vision qualities? Because vision is essential for developing motor functions, language, social communication, concentration. You need to have a stable and good vision. And 70 to 80% of all activities in the classroom are connected to visual inputs. So if they are not good, then children can get problems. And reading is the most visual challenging activities that we learn in school. And we have found in research, and others have found in research, that between 30 and 40% of all children have disturbed vision, small or big. And if there is a brain damage, between 60 and 70% of the brain damaged person have vision problems. And with hearing loss, we see there is very big differences in findings. But we have a PhD candidate now who's into that. So the first project we had was securing education for children in Tanzania, and that was a Vision 2030 project, and we had it together with Koblenz University of Applied Sciences in Germany and Patandi Teachers College of Special Needs Education in Tanzania, which is the only college for special needs in Tanzania. And what we did was that we delivered teachers' courses, 30 credits, that we have had at Western Norway University earlier, which was called Vision for Reading and Learning. And in that course, there was also 2 periods with practical work. The first practical work was to go out in school and do vision screening of pupils. How is their functional vision? And then the practical work in the next period was to get some of these children who had disturbances to give them lessons in vision stimulation and see the effect of that. So we did research on the other side on all these results that we did out in schools. And of course, our partner Patandi was very, very important in this work. So we were also looking into how is the classrooms, how are things presented, the distance to what is presented, the position of the child in the class, the light conditions, because we know some has electricity, some hasn't, and is it there? It's perhaps not good enough. How is the contrasts? There are international rules on how many looks you are going to have in a classroom, but no classroom that I've visited had followed these rules. So also, is the child nearsighted or farsighted, or perhaps have disturbed eye movements that makes the text go double or jumping letters or things like that, because that will be a challenge for learning. So the goal was with that project to reduce poverty through stimulating better reading capacity and increase the percentage of students passing the final exams. We saw that there were many children who couldn't read, although they have been going to school several years. And also based on better viewing conditions in the classroom and improving vision functions among students with vision disturbances. And in Tanzania, children don't get any screening of vision or hearing before they start school. So no one knows if there are some disturbances or not. And we see that when teachers understand that pupils are struggling, they can help, and they get another perspective. it's not that he is lazy, it's that he is not able to see it. And when they know something about the position in classroom, perhaps I'll move that child to another position. When they know something about the lighting, or perhaps he shouldn't sit just beside the window because there's too much light and the blackboard is in the dark. So he can't see it because he can't adapt. So they learn a lot, and in the course, the first year, with the first group, we had 12 teachers from Patandi, and that was great, because at Patandi they are educating the special needs teachers. So when we could educate them, they could educate also the new special needs teachers in vision problems. And we had also those from vision. I also have a background as a vision teacher, but I've been researching in the other problems than blindness and low vision. And now they could learn also about the broad spectrum of vision problems. So we made it also the second time, and even there we got 9 teachers from Patandi, and remember Patandi has only 32 tutors. So more than 20 tutors got insight in vision, although they were into hearing problems or intellectual problems. They now know that they have to have focus also on vision. And parallel to the education, we had research with 5 master degrees. They took it on other universities in Arusha. We had 2 PhDs. And we have been writing some articles and book chapters and had conferences and presenting on conferences. So we did our work with functional vision assessment on 150 pupils in Standard 1. And as we see also in Norway, it's not enough only to have focus on those starting in school, because things are changing. So we were also out in Standard 5 and had 120 pupils tested there. And this is pictures from the training sessions where our students had to follow 2 pupils and have 1 lesson each day for 3 weeks, and then they were screening them again to see if things had changed. So the expected results were that the more knowledge about vision among primary school teachers is a goal, and in special needs education, and in the long run also secondary school teachers, but at Patandi it's only primary school teachers educated. And that we need to educate in higher academic level was some of the reactions we got after this project or in the end of this project. And to develop new programs and research. But Patandi, that we had the education there, they are a motor now for also having networks with special needs teachers that know vision. So for the pupils, we wanted to see if it gets better reading, if they could manage their exams, and if there is less dropout. Yeah, I think I've just dropped there. So we upscaled, and that is where Norad came in. We have partners like Patandi, we continue with those, but they are connected to Tanzanian Institute of Education. And Tanzania Institute of Education are making all the curriculums for teachers' education. So that's why they are involved now, because that's close to, Patandi is close to them. The tie is also into the curriculums for preschools and for primary schools. And then we also have a new partner, and that is the university in Dodoma, where they had a bachelor degree in special needs, and they wanted to have a master degree in special needs. So the we started a CPD course, or Patandi started a CPD course together with Thai. So now we use those who had taken a master in the first project as tutors for the CPD course for the new teachers, and we only had vision teachers, only those who were educated for visual impaired. And they together developed a curriculum, a book of 160 pages, and they involved also other experts to make this curriculum, and of course we were also there in the background. It resulted in a CPD course with 19 participants from the Arusha area, and Professor Felder from Germany and me, we were supervising the tutors, but they had the responsibility. Oh, God. Yeah, so I'll jump. And parallel to the CPD course, we had the curriculum development for the master study, and they have built up a master study for hearing and for vision. So we are only into the vision part. And they started last year, and we had a group now with 20 students for 2023 to 25, and a new group that started now that's going to be finished after this project. And in the project we have had annual meetings with all the partners so that they can know what is the challenges, what have we done, what do we need to do, and I think that has been very useful. So we are going to have an end conference in May 25. Yeah, I think you can read this later. But for me, I see that it is very important that we build on the competence that's already there, and that we build something that is focused on research, and that we build something that gives the participants a formal competence. Because then also we can continue with developing, they can continue with developing the education. So now we have one who is going to have his dissertation in Bergen in defense, it's called, in January. So then he is finished with his PhD in this area. And another one, the one who's looking into vision and hearing, she is finished in summer at the University of Dodoma. And then we have 2 people that can go in and continue with the master program. So formal education, I think, is very, very important. So we see our work as going into quality education and poverty and ensure healthy lives. And that's also, these teachers, they can see when do we need to transfer this to the health system and how can we work together with the health system. So the big question that we have in the end now is how to develop a system for structured assessment and follow-up. So because we see that at least those teachers who didn't be in the system of special needs education, they are not able to properly use their competence when they go back in school. So there need to be built a system where at least they can have a part of their position to use in the school, because there are 900 to 1,000 students in the school. So they need to have something where they can go and screen children who are struggling with reading, to screen perhaps all that's starting in school, screen the disabled children in school, so they can use some time for that and not be overloaded with everything that is in a normal classroom. Yes. That's
wonderful. Thank you so much. And now we move on to, we welcome Elisa Bjørstad, from Senior Advisor to the Norwegian Association of the Disabled. and also Irene Kallestad, Senior Advisor of Disability Inclusion at the Atlas Alliance. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Oh, microphone. Hello. So my name is Irene Kallestad. I represent the Atlas Alliance. We will be using a PowerPoint presentation, but everything that's on there we will say, and you will get the presentation afterwards, just so you know that. Like I said, I work in the Atlas Alliance. The Atlas Alliance is an organization here in Norway that represents the different disability organizations that do international development work. So the National Association of Blind and Partially Sighted, the National Association of Persons with Intellectual Disabilities, etc. We were founded in 1981, and our main goals is that equal rights, that everyone has equal rights, and that all Norwegian development aid and humanitarian assistance becomes inclusive for all.
And my name is Elise Bjåstad. I'm a senior advisor for the Norwegian Association of Disabled, and we're part of the Atlas Alliance. And we are a human rights organization that was established in 1931. And we have developed what we have called the inclusive learning approach, which I will talk more about, but with technical support from Enabling Education Network, or ENET. And we have support introduction of inclusive education in Uganda, Zambia, Zanzibar, which is part of Tanzania, and Somalia.
Yes, and all the work of the Atlas Alliance, including this project, is guided by the UNCRPD. So I will speak briefly about a partnership called Together for Inclusion. Together for Inclusion is a consortium made up of Norwegian NGOs and organizations of persons with disabilities. We have many of you present here today. I see Adra, I see Save the Children, I see Strømme. Basically, this came about almost as a result of the Global Disability Summit in 2018, where several representatives from the Norwegian authorities, including Norad, were present. And that sort of led to this new funding window that came about in 2019. It was for persons in vulnerable situations in general, but with a specific one for persons with disabilities. And at the urging of Save the Children Norway and others, we all joined together and applied for this funding as a consortium of 7 OPDs and 9 NGOs. We work in 3 different thematic areas: human rights advocacy, inclusive education, economic empowerment, and are in 6 countries: Ethiopia, Mozambique, Niger, Somalia, South Sudan, and Uganda. The project started at the very end of 2019, so we'd like to say it started in 2020, and it's finishing up now. Oh yeah, what is different about this particular partnership? We like to say OPDs in the lead, and what do we mean by that? It means that the representative organizations of persons with disabilities are in the driver's seats for this project. We have country groups in each country, and most of them, not all, we have one of the OPDs as the coordinator and the country lead. There's really no other partnership like it. There are other consortia out there, other partnerships where OPDs and NGOs work together, but this is the only one that's led by an NGO, by a TPO. They're usually led by specialized NGOs like Sightsavers or others. Inclusive education is very important in this partnership. It has more than 60% of the funding. That's why we're here today. All the 6 countries are working in inclusive education, most of them with the model that Elise would present. The ones that are not are sort of like very much aligned and just work in slightly different ways.
Okay, so I will say briefly what is inclusive education. There is no universally agreed definition, but I will present the one we are using to sort of position us a little bit. So inclusive education is about ensuring that every learner is present in education, is participating in academic and social activities, and is achieving to the best of their ability. So it's about all learners, not only learners with disabilities, and it's not only about accessing education, but also about participating and achieving. And we focus on changing the system, not changing the child, not trying to fix the child or placing the inclusion problem within the child. So we use a twin-track approach to address inclusive education barriers, focusing on the system. We ensure that teaching and learning environments, attitudes and methods respond to diversity and promote inclusion. And secondly, we focus on learners by respecting their views and providing appropriate support, or what we have called reasonable accommodation. So we have developed what we call the inclusive learning approach, and it has two components. The first is focused on teacher training. It's called the inclusive teaching component. The development started in 2016, and the target group are teachers, head teachers, pedagogues, but we also involve other key stakeholders. I will say more about that later, but through observers and school inclusion teams. And the focus is on how to build an inclusive school environment and remove barriers to learning. The second component is focused on advocacy and is called the inclusive advocacy component. The development started a bit later in 2020, actually with TOFI, and the target group are organizations of persons with disabilities, or OPDs, but it also involves allies of OPDs. And we focus on advocacy for inclusive education. And I will say a little bit more about each of these components. The inclusive teaching component is, as I said, teacher training material, and we focus on creating contextually relevant teacher training materials on inclusive education, where we prioritize practice over theory and learning by doing. And it builds teachers' capacity to be innovative and critically reflective problem solvers. And this is because inclusion challenges doesn't have a recipe. You need to be creative, you need to know how to find information. And yeah, because you cannot have all the information, you need to be quite on your feet. And we build a cadre of skilled and confident teacher trainers. The material is co-developed and therefore co-owned. There is strong local ownership in it. And it recognizes the vital importance of collaboration and therefore embeds mechanisms to ensure teachers are not tackling inclusion challenges on their own. And we ensure that in-service teacher training, which is where we often start, is closely linked to and influences sustained change in pre-service teacher training. Okay, so this slide seeks to illustrate how we pilot the inclusive teaching component and how we involve different actors. So at the center of the illustration, there is a school building, which illustrates the pilot schools. And this can be a fairly small number of schools where we demonstrate this model. And at the center of the approach are teachers. And we train teachers by selecting a number of principal trainers. These are pedagogues who normally works in service teacher training or pre-service. And then, in addition to that, we have ended up also selecting lead pedagogues. And part of it was COVID, because people couldn't travel. But it meant that also lead pedagogues were from the countries where we work, and they were mentored from afar. And we've sort of kept that because it was very useful and was also part of strengthening local ownership. In the schools, I was going to say, teachers are trained on 7 core modules and are able to practice in between each training. So this happens over 2 to 3 years often because it has to fit into their school calendar. And they choose an inclusive education coordinator in the school all teachers are trained because everyone has to be on the same page. But this is a hub function. It's a person who coordinates, and they also create a school inclusion team, which is composed of teachers, but it can also be learners with and without disabilities. It can be parents. It can be OPDs, and also community members who can be a resource in solving inclusion barriers. Finally, we train observers, and these are often staff or senior members of education departments who join because they're interested and who are also able to learn about the module while they monitor and see the progress. So these are a collaborative project.
Yes, and then we have the inclusive advocacy component, which is kind of unique to this model. It, of course, complements the other model, but it recognizes the role of the OPDs as the representative organizations of persons with disabilities and their role in advocating for inclusive education. But also recognizes the fact that people need to get skills and knowledge to be able to take on that role. We often say that inclusive education is for everybody. It improves the education of every child. But let's make sure that learners with disabilities are not left behind. Our movement has the motto, nothing about us without us. And education is definitely a field where adults with disabilities have not necessarily had the role they should have had. There are not that many teachers with disabilities, etc. So we think it's very important that the OPDs take this role to do advocacy, to participate. And many adults with disabilities have themselves been a child with a disability in the same system at some point, and their lived experience is very important. Several of the other speakers have touched on this too, like Anna speaking of the importance of having researchers with disabilities. It's a little bit the same as this. This component has a similar sort of structure to the other one. You want to build a group of skilled and confident OPD facilitators who can then roll out the trainings and then can take on this role as being a vocal advocate for inclusive education in their community or their country. Here we have a similar model as the one that Lisa showed. You have the school in the middle, OPD members, OPD facilitators, the lead OPD facilitators, and they work together with both the observers and the school inclusion teams.
I will say a little bit about results. And I should first say that we are seeing a lot of changes in the schools where we pilot this. Teachers are, and headmasters are changing their practice and approaching learners differently. We are seeing increased enrollment overall, and we also see increased enrollment of learners with disabilities. Neighboring schools are often actually wanting to receive the same training because they see these benefits. And actually what happens is that sometimes learners who are not able to get to the neighboring school comes to this inclusive school. And we are seeing evidence of not just access, but participation and achievement. And I wanted to mention, I was recently in one of these, I can call it ELA schools, and I met a girl with disability who, she was not able to speak, but she was part of the school. She had been included and was part of the school inclusion team. She had recently finished her end of primary school examination. I was very proud of this. And she had not started school when she was meant to. So she had delayed her start, but she had still managed to complete. So there are really important results in the schools. But I want to talk about some of the systemic changes that we are seeing. How this, because the aim of the pilot is to actually create changes in the system. And we are seeing the ministries of education are really interested in this. We have they have approved the material for use in in-service teacher training in Zambia, Zanzibar, and in Uganda. Somalia, this is still work in progress. But in For instance, Zanzibar, they have decided the Department of Teacher Education have decided to roll this out with very minimal support from us. And in Uganda, they're doing the same. They have a CPD program where they are working to roll this out in all the schools. We are also seeing inclusive education symposiums being organized by ministries of education and other actors in the country. We have particularly seen this in Zambia and Uganda. They have done this several years. Zanzibar is actually doing it this year. So there are local initiatives that are coming up. They are also starting to change policy. In Zanzibar, they are mainstreaming inclusive education into their education policy. They are trying to do the same in Uganda. And Zambia and Somalia is coming behind. And in addition to that, universities and teacher training colleges who have been part of this from the start are starting to take this into their curriculums. So we have seen at State University of Zanzibar, they are now in the process of making curriculum changes and take this in. At Kiambogo University in Uganda, they are using the material. They're not at the stage when they're doing curriculum change, but they are using it with that intention. We see OPDs have taken a bigger space in the discussion and dialogue about inclusive education in country, for instance, at inclusive education symposiums. And the purpose of TOFI was really to get other NGOs involved in this, to learn from it. And we are seeing that some of our colleagues are now starting to look at how can we use this material in our other programs. And I want to mention Save the Children, Stremme Foundation, and ADRA, who has done a lot of this already. And then there is an emerging community of practice that we are trying to nurture. So recently we had a lead facilitator training. We had 2 of them actually, where people from all of the countries where this is used came together and were learning and sharing their experiences with this. And the ITC, the teaching component, is also being used by other actors in Mozambique, Ethiopia, and in Iraq. Okay, a little bit about lessons learned. We have seen that progress towards inclusive education is possible, but it's a long-term process and it requires long-term engagement, particularly from local actors. I mean, we are there to support, but it's really about supporting their process. It must be adapted to each context, but there need to be some common principles. Education is for all. Disability is part of human diversity. We need to change the system, not changing the child. And it requires involvement from a wide range of stakeholders. We mentioned Ministry of Education, teacher training institution. You also have, of course, health systems, etc. So there are many who needs to be involved, but the role of civil society is crucial in moving towards inclusive education. Yeah. A little bit about our plans for the future. I mentioned that we're building a community of practice. We want to create a digital platform that makes this material easier available. It's open source, so anyone can use it. And we want to create a platform where also those who use it can then have a dialogue, share experiences, and maybe ask questions as they progress. We are also aiming to adapt and pilot this material in a humanitarian context. And Save the Children has volunteered or want to take this on as a lead organization. And we're also, as NARD, starting more work on how to improve what we call systems for reasonable accommodation, what the schools can draw on in solving inclusion challenges. So for instance, how do we get more effectively assisted technologies, etc. That was briefly.
Yes, thank you. Like I said earlier, the Atlas Alliance is finishing up both our regular framework agreement and the Together for Inclusion agreement with Norad at the end of this year. So we have applied for a new 5-year agreement with Norad that we have called Collective Action for Disability Rights. We just wanted to mention here that we will continue all this great work on education from both the two agreements, continue also the work with other actors like the NGOs. And as an example, we wanted to point out the fact that the inclusive learning approach will be implemented in Nepal. We have set up a very nice country group there. Several of the organizations are present. The country group and the consortium will be led by the Norwegian Association of the Blind and Partially Sighted, who have, for the last 4 or 5 years, been working on this model in Mozambique, in Ethiopia, and are now taking it into another country. So all this that started with NAD has moved on to other DPOs, other NGOs, and is continuing to grow. So we're very proud of that. We look forward to what the next 5 years will bring. That was it for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and for the nice and impactful insights. I think we now welcome Vegard Solhjell, Director General of Norad, who will provide us a more forward-looking perspective on inclusive education. So,
good. Can you hear me well? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see so many here on this cold December day. And especially happy that we are able to gather stakeholders with experience on the field of inclusive education, of course, the Atlas Alliance, but also development people's own organizations. I think it's worth mentioning how important the DPOs are in the work towards SDG 4. So, children and young people living with disabilities are probably the group that is furthest away from reaching SDG 4 and reaching the goal of learning for all. I think we acknowledged, and for me, the evaluation a year or two ago, was an eye-opener. I think we must acknowledge that it's time for action also now for this group. And I use the word group, but group, 1 of 6 people globally, approximately, we don't know exactly, live with disabilities. Some visible, many not visible to many of us. So often not seen, but such a big part of every society, our own society, like every society around the world. And we're talking about 1 of 6. We can't talk about inclusiveness if we don't do well on people with disabilities and including them in education. So we have to put it at center stage, but we also have a long way to go. We have to acknowledge that. It is a priority for Norway, and we're trying to reach people with disabilities, but it's also a very challenging task. As a follow-up of the evaluation of Norway's work on disability inclusion and the strategy for promoting inclusion of the rights of persons with disabilities, this seminar shows the work that we have done together over the last years. And I want to mention just a few partners and institutions here. First, of course, Fafo for the collaboration on the seminar, and for our partnership on this important topic, but also Oslo Met for their work to improve the evidence base, which is close to my heart, simply because when you have solid evidence, it's easier to reach through to politicians, to colleagues, and to prioritize. So I think that's an issue we have to continue working on. Build a solid evidence base and a knowledge base that can be used in tough prioritizations, which we will see in development assistance in the years to come. As previously mentioned, of course, the Atlas Alliance and the Global Campaign for Education are important. For instance, through the Together for Inclusion work, and I think it also shows great promise for the future and what will have to be a strengthening in the years to come. So within education for development, we can see, I think, an increased interest in inclusion of children with disabilities, and also what I, at least to a certain degree, see as a request from our partner countries to collaborate on this challenge. There is, of course, a situation where many of our partner countries also see that this is something we have to deal with for the future. But the ability is not always there. But starting with an interest and engagement to put inclusion closer to the heart of education is an important starting point. And I believe that we should also take that into account when we build our portfolios. It's much easier to achieve results when there's an engagement and interest to start with from a partner country. There also seems to be, at least to a certain degree, a momentum now within the education sphere to put inclusion at the heart of future education efforts. I think for Norway, it's important also to build on this and to actually strengthen that momentum when we take part on international arenas, in boards, in seminars, conferences, in the dialogue with our partners. It's not only about how we do our own grant management, it's also about the normative work that we do on the international arena, strengthening these efforts. So to wrap up this seminar, and stakeholders working together across academia, DPO, civil society and Norad gives me hope for the future and work towards 2030. But make no mistake, it will be very tough. It does not come by itself. And many of you who have been doing this work for decades know that much better than me, but I've seen it in other fields of work. It's only hard work that can provide progress in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vegard, for your inspiring remarks. We now move on to our final session, which is a panel discussion, which we entitled The Road to Inclusion, Multi-Pronged Approach and Perspectives. This is a time for us to engage in a dialogue, in an interactive session. We will now invite our panel participants. I will start with Ellen Rood, who is a senior advisor at the Section for Education and Research. We probably need to do some logistics here to arrange the chairs. Then we have also our earlier presenters, Irene and Elisa, please. Also Gunvor. Let's take a seat. We also have Anna Shelland, our colleague from Fafo. Also Runa and Rolf. Is yours. One more seat there. Great. Thank you so much. I'm not going to bore you with lots of my questions that I have taken during also the presentations. Perhaps maybe we can do one round of questions to our panel participants and open up the floor for discussion. So perhaps maybe I can start with you, Gunvor. You mentioned that you're studying in Tanzania. Excuse me. Because We have mics for speakers. You can take around as needed. So my question is, you talked about in the case of Tanzania about teacher training in vision-related issues, and also how can you say similarly or similar competency building programs be integrated into national education policies to ensure a widespread approach? Perhaps you could tap into your experience in Tanzania and then how is this taken up?
Yeah. Is it functioning or do I have to? Yeah. Okay.
No, it's
no,
not.
no, it's not. But now it's not.
Hello?
Yeah. Our experiences is that we started with special needs education at this college. And now we also are working with Tanzanian Institute of Education. And they are responsible for all teachers' curriculums in the teachers' colleges in all Tanzania. So they now are working that some elements of the education that we have been presenting are integrated in teachers' education in Tanzania, in the curriculums in all teachers' education. And they are now also building up a new college for special needs education so that there will be 2. And the normal education for vision teachers is 2 years. And we had the CPD course, but they only had teachers or vision teachers from the region around Patandi. And we see that this is not a model for the future, making these CPD courses. So Patandi and Tanzanian Institute of Education has been this year working to implement the CPD course in the 2-year education of vision teachers, so that it will be a part of being a vision teacher to learn this broader spectrum of vision for all, for also those sitting in classroom having smaller problems. So that is now integrated so that the young students at Patandi, they will learn. And those groups, they are more than 100 students. So the challenge is now, and we are going to work on that for the next half year, is how to educate in this complicated and detailed thematic with those large groups, so that they are really able to do a good and precise assessment of vision disturbances and vision at all. Because we also see it's necessary for these teachers to know it with regard on the blind children. Because many children are seen as blind when they are low vision, and we find them in the schools for the blind sitting with vision, reading Braille. White dots on white paper. How blind are they? So it's necessary that teachers, the vision teachers, can really see how is vision functioning for each child in all categories, and learn how can we educate this child in the best way. So I think we are on a good track, because we have Tanzania Institute of Education with us in the work. And they are really proud of having this knowledge, and they are hardworking to spread it.
Fascinating. Perhaps, I think it's very interesting that you raised about the issue of teachers training, which is at the core of the model that you are working on. And maybe, Elisa, when it comes to your, the inclusive learning approach, as you call it, where you have shown us, the schools being at the center, and also various components there, has led to, of course, significant progress, it seems, including policy change and also curriculum integration in different countries that you have shown us. Perhaps what lessons can you draw from the progress you've made so far, pretty much on something that has implications for global inclusive education efforts, would you say? It's a big question, but perhaps, some of the key lessons perhaps that we can tap into your experience.
Well, I think we have, does it work? Yes, can you hear me? We have seen that piloting, if it's done well, can have quite big ripple effects. We've sort of demonstrated something, but brought many people with us to look at what we can learn from that, and it's starting to have these organic impacts in the countries where we work, where people are taking this on as their own, and we see very sort of passionate people working on it. And that's maybe a second lesson, is that in each of these contexts we have identified people who are very passionate about this, who really wants to see positive change where on inclusive education, and is taking this on. And we have seen, like, some of the people we work with have in teacher training have, for instance, done PhDs without our interference on inclusive education. So we are seeing a lot of positive ripple effects. And thirdly, I have mentioned it already, but OPDs are among these champions who really should be part of the process and a driving force in seeing this happen. So
wonderful, great. I mean, in his remark, the director Bård Vegard mentioned about the notion of collaboration. I think that also our partnership to tackling, these broader global issues. And if I come to you, Erin, how can, the lessons from TOEFI, for example, how can partnerships like TOEFI inspire, if you will, a paradigm shift in terms of, understanding and promoting inclusive education? Perhaps, is it that easy to establish partnerships? Are they without problems? Perhaps you can let us know a little bit about, how can we establish partnerships that did indeed work on these settings, please?
Thank you, Theodros. And yes, it is that easy, so I will just pass it on. I think it's a great question, and we've learned a lot through this partnership, and there's some very practical implications, some excellent benefits from working in partnerships. For instance, just looking at the colleagues here, I was thinking about Somalia and how in Somalia, in this partnership, ADRA and Save the Children are both very active in Somalia, but they work in completely different parts of the country. So through this partnership, they've been able to work on the same model, led by NAD and led by them, all of them, but with the NAD ILA model, but covering different parts of the country. So that's something very practical, while having more people involved, more organizations involved. Of course, the goal is for every country to have a well-functioning education system based in the Ministry of Education, etc. But we're not quite there yet. So that's why we need to involve different actors to move towards that point. And like Elisa said, for us, the active participation of persons with disabilities in the partnership has been extremely important, because to have the lived experience and to have the representative authority of being an elected organization, it's very, very important. I also think that in my presentation earlier, I had a sentence that said finance and formalize, but I didn't really have time to talk about it. But what we mean about that is that for a collaboration and a partnership to work, you need to have some financing for those activities that you do together, and you need to formalize the partnership. Because one thing we as an OPD has seen previously is that oftentimes large actors like UNICEF or others, they want to come in and work with one of our partners, whether it be in Mozambique or Uganda, wherever, but they want to come with like a little bit of money and to do like can you implement this activity for us? Mm-hmm. So in this partnership, it's been very important for us to that the OPDs are the same level as all the other actors, whether it's a large INGO or a small national NGO, etc. So that has been very important for us, for this partnership, to lift the role of the OPD and also give the organizations more resources to be able to take on that role.
Wonderful, great, thank you. Going back to the knowledge production side of the issue that we've been tackling, perhaps maybe Rolf, if you look into I mean, you've done a very fantastic job. The literature review, I recommend. It's a good read that takes into account, what we know about inclusive education, different models. You have given us different about 4 different types of models, and the review, as far as I understand it, underscores the tension between focusing on placement in mainstream schools versus transforming teaching practices. So in your view, what are the key priorities for achieving this meaningful inclusion, especially in countries where we have, teacher competency and also infrastructures are quite limited? Perhaps you could reflect a little bit from your own experience as well.
Thank you. You can hear me well? Okay, thank you. I think the work that now do is really important to build competencies on the teacher level. Without having some people in the forefront, and teachers are in the forefront, both international and also in Norway, then you have some ideas how to develop the system. And we see that some countries in the global south, for example India, have systematically some kind of in-service training for teachers. But other countries where we work in, for example in Nepal, it's a distance between the federal education centers and the university. And then at least in a Nepali context and a similar context, I think it's one way of doing is to try to bridge the gap between those different areas of words, more or less, as I will tell it. And I think having some kind of race or reflecting of the teacher's own practices, then you will involve them to a broader degree in how to make teaching environments, how to make the learning environment for the pupils in focus. And that will be the same, either the size of class or either of the size of education aids, because most of those ideas, those practical items has to be developed on the local level. That's our experiences, at least.
Fantastic. Thank you. Perhaps also maybe a related aspect that, Ruda, you have given us a little bit of highlights on the notion of coloniality, if you want to touch some of the broader perspectives here. And your report highlights that many low-income countries rely on Western models of inclusive education, often without sufficient adaptation to local context. You mentioned Ubuntu in the report. Perhaps if you could just say a little bit about that and help us unpack on how local context can be meaningfully embedded into policies and practices from your perspective.
I can try to say a bit at least. I can't solve the problem, but I can try to explain a bit more what I mean by the coloniality, and we can use some examples from today. The definition, we had a definition of inclusive education, for example, presented, and that's what I claim as the individual right model to inclusive education. And it fits very well with the Western educational system developed from the 1980s and onwards. It's based on the logic that I, as a pupil, have the right to get something, and this right should be served by the teacher. And then we get into the logic that we need to develop teacher competences to serve each child. In a classroom with 60 students, that will fail. And that's the reality that you need to work with in a way that we can't use that kind of a strategy that is working in Norway, where we have 15 to 20 students, in a culture where in a way we have 40, 50, 60 students. So we need to, we need really to think about what inclusive education can mean, and that's when I write about Ubuntu. In a way, that's a different approach to inclusive education, at least that's a proposal as a social responsibility model of inclusive education. Where the responsibility is not only the teacher's responsibility. And then we could start to see if that is a possibility to develop that into a system with, for example, 16 students. And that's how I really challenge everybody working in the field of inclusive education to really think and reflect on how we look at and understand inclusive education.
Great. Thank you. And I think a related concept is what my colleague Anna has touched upon in her presentation. And Anna, perhaps I'll come to you about, how can we ensure, as you mentioned, you've talked about you are the researcher finding yourself in different contexts, but how can we ensure that local researchers and communities on the ground have a more prominent role in shaping the narratives and methodologies? I really like your quadrant that shows where we should be when it comes to, knowledge production processes. But what steps do you think can be taken to reduce somehow the coloniality of knowledge, if you will?
Oh, sorry.
Is working? Yes. First, I have to say, yesterday I was explaining to Theodros a Norwegian concept called lissepasning. Can't be translated. But I think in many ways that's what I got from you, Rune, today, because this really ties up. And inclusive education in the Global South is really a debate that you can think about as colonized by three majority groups. It's colonized by the Global North. It's colonized by non-disabled academics. And it's colonized by adults, but it's about children. So, and I think the debate about decolonizing has come pretty far in African academia. The last picture of our team here was from the AfriNeed conference in Johannesburg, in Cape Town last year, and there's a lot of attention, around the roads must fall, and so things are changing there. In the Global North, there is a similar debate in academia about decolonizing disability research, having the the disabled academic perspective on disability, already changing paradigms within, for example, neurodivergent research. Now, on children, that's really where we are lagging behind. We're not, and I think in research we call it epistemological, it's a hermeneutical issue that, to a low extent, almost any researcher would not have a shared language with the children that we work with that allows these children to communicate their lived experience in a way that academics can understand. So I would applaud the process going on in like the Global North, Global South process. I think the able-bodied decolonization of disability research needs to move to the Global South. And I also think we have to, since the Convention on the Right of the Child, we know that children have a right to be heard. We're still not good at it, and especially not in academia, because there's such a gap between, and I think it's a language gap to a large degree. I would like, finally, if I may, credit the Research Council, because their new research grants for global health, for example, strongly encourages and rewards that new projects are developed predominantly in the South, and that South partners should have a large part of the budget. They also give seed grants so that applicants can go and meet and sit with applicants in the South to ensure these grounding of new research. And just say the Nord Global program that usually finance development research did none of that. So there is certainly progress in the way that some of the finance institutions are thinking about this.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very important point to make sure that we've seen a shift. I don't think we're stuck. There are progress being made. And perhaps maybe my final round of questioning would be with you, Elin Ruud from Norad. Of course, as we know, Norway has been a strong advocate of inclusive education. And as we also approach the global Disability Summit in 2025. It's in March in Berlin, by March, April, I think. And what role should international donors play in ensuring that inclusive education policies address the unique challenges of low-income settings, as we've heard?
Thank you. I think this debate and this panel kind of shows how difficult it is to actually do something, because there is so many different perspectives and things to take into account.
So, but I think as Norad, it's very important for us, and this is what we are doing with this seminar and with the work that we have done the last 2 years, is to gather evidence from research through our collaboration with Oslo Met, for instance, and Fafo, and through the Norad project, for instance, and to really gather knowledge through that, and also through experience from DPOs and from our the NGOs that we are working through on inclusive education in the different countries. And also I think it's very, very important to take into account the context and the different circumstances that the different countries are in, and also the ownership of the local government, the local ministries of education, and local researchers, as we have discussed. So I think taking all this into account, and still there is a big need for action. As we saw on this, as Huafeng presented, the knowledge gap is huge, and we really need to address this group. So I think gathering evidence but also take action is very important, and to do no harm is really also very important. So it is a difficult position, but also it can lead to fruitful results. So what we are doing is that we are working with you, all our partners, to gather the information, to gather the experience, to work together and combine our forces. And then also, we are part of boards in the Global Partnership for Education, Education Cannot Wait, UNICEF board. We are taking part in these boards, and to kind of provide and give this information that we are gathering to those boards, and also making the priorities for children with disabilities through those platforms, I think is very, very important. Wonderful. And I think also that through this discussion that there seems to be need for action directly at children with disabilities and young people with disabilities, not only mainstream inclusion. It seems that there really is a need for a specific approach. So I think that is kind of what we are trying to do in our best way with the help of all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. The audience, you've been very patient with us for the last 2.5 hours, so let's shift gear and bring the questions to you. Any questions, insights that you may have, you want to share with the panel among ourselves? The floor is open. See one hand there. And if you may quickly introduce yourself and the organization you represent, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Anne Breivik. I work for Strong Foundation. And thank you for very interesting presentations today. From all the different perspectives. We've had the pleasure of being part of Together for Inclusion, and today we focused a lot on systems, on teachers, what's happening within the classroom. And I was visiting some of the schools that were participating in northern Uganda, I think in November 2021, so quite early on in the project, and we already saw the increased enrollment of children with disabilities, and we saw the anchoring with the head teacher, this approach in the inclusive teaching or inclusive learning approach. But what I also saw was a very active school inclusion team. So I was just wondering, it's for the panel in general, the role of parents and the role of the wider community. Because, there's a lot to do within the school and within the system, but there's also a lot that can be done with the engagement and the awareness raising and the involvement of the community that really pushes this forward.
Fantastic question. Should we take up one or two questions and then we come to the panel perhaps? Any other questions, insights from the audience? Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panel. On the way to work today, I was listening and revisiting an episode by Echo, the Norwegian program on NRK, and it was talking about tidlige tegn på skoletretthet. So early signs of children dropping out or being tired of school. And there's sort of a fairly long for NRK to be interview with a 6-year-old, and he's crying about school and how sad it is to be there because he can only play like 30 Lego bricks at a time, and then he has to go back and work on his letters, and then he has to work on his math. And they're talking about how so many schools now, how many kids are showing signs of being tired of school. I'm going to get to my point. So then that made me, and then they talked about the importance of play and more play-based learning in the early years. And that made me reflect on whether or not the focus that we've had in Norway, but that we also see in developing countries among donors, to focus on learning to read and write by the end of 2nd grade, by the end of 3rd grade. What does that do for the group of kids we're here talking about, whether they have this or that disability and neurodivergent? Has anybody looked at that? Because I'm wondering if that would, to a greater extent, exclude also some of these groups that we're here talking about including. And it's just heartbreaking to hear this little 6-year-old. And I was thinking of little 6-year-olds in all the other countries that we visited, and where you see them and the problems that they have. And with the 60 kids in the classroom or 80 kids in the classroom, and then trying to sit and learn your A, B, C, D, and learn to read and write from you're very young, and perhaps you haven't even been to preschool. Sorry, a little bit of a long intervention, but it just really spoke to me today, and I wanted to hear your reflections on then how we could potentially make a difference if we focus more on play-based learning rather than the strict, more academic learning from a very young age. Thanks.
Excellent question. One more we take from here.
Birgit Philipsen from ADRA. I was looking at the research, and especially I was interested in the research that you were doing, Anne. And how have you looked at? We look at physical disabilities, sight, hearing, and so on that are fairly easy to detect. But have you also, in this type of research, have you looked at the mental disabilities, psychological trauma, those kind of issues that may be much more hidden and much more difficult to define? I would like to hear a little bit about that.
Love to.
Wonderful. No, I think we could bring these questions to the panel. Perhaps who wants to go at it? The first one is Anna's question about the inclusion issues that she mentioned, and experience of involvement of the community and the parent. I think I can relate to that a lot. Recently, when we did a study in Niger, there was a child that has a physical disability, essentially mobility. His father, who is an imam and also a Quranic teacher, has bought him a donkey to transport him from home to the school. And his father's primary concern for that particular child is he doesn't want him to be a beggar when he grows up. So it's quite fascinating to see when parents are involved, when the communities are involved, how far we can address these notions of inclusion. Perhaps maybe you could reflect on that, including also the question on intellectual disability issues. Please, Rolf, please.
Thank you. I will respond based on the review we have done. And we find, regarding the parents, we find different positions. One position is where the parents want to hide the child. They are a bit embarrassed of what they've got. I think it might be a result of witchcraft or whatever it might be. And also, based on economic reasons, there might be small school fees. They have not enough money to everyday living to get food, and then in addition lose time for bringing the school to the child to school, or might also use the child as a source of income, as begging, as you briefly mentioned. That's the one position. And then it's difficult to argue how it's on the domestic side should be some kind of change to get the child into school. And we know that the report also says that some directly finances for families make some differences. Also school meals and so on. The other position is those who have a kind of resources that cope with the domestic. They really encourage the idea of schooling. they bring their child to school, as you said, which it makes status. They feel empowered. They are not looked at as a family with kids that not have some possibility of the future, and they have really high expectation of the idea of schooling, much below what might be realistically, but still that vision of the future is really important to cope with. And I will add a third aspect to this method. When we're also reading the report, is child are observed or looked at differently. If the disability is a cause of armed conflict, then it's more accepted than if it is something that are genetically or by birth or something brought into the situation. And that also make a difference in these debate. So I could go on, but I will leave the floor for others.
Sanna, and then we can take a round. Anderson.
We're not constrained to one question, right?
No, please feel free to respond to any of it, really, all of it.
One question was for me, really, but I was a bit intrigued by your question to Geir Hanne. I just written an article about neurodivergent children and school absenteeism, which was kind of at the center of what you asked about, but about Norwegian children. And I think one of the lessons to learn from that is that we have developed a school, a curriculum, a schooling system that is completely overwhelming many neurodivergent children who would, I believe, do better in some of the African classrooms I have visited. Because to some of these children, and I do believe to some children with other disabilities as well, getting into a classroom, knowing exactly what's going to happen in this lecture, you have your spot. That's the same spot that you're going to have every day. You get homework from today to next. Someone is instructing you on what to learn. Can actually be preventative from dropout from school. Whilst a Norwegian kid today at even a young age is thrown into a system of changing classroom, changing groups, changing places, having to work in group, doing presentations, having long... It's completely overwhelming for children who already have to use their excess cognitive capacity to manage their disabilities. So that's one of the things I thought of when I heard what you were inquiring about. The questions on this broad category called cognitive disabilities is close to my heart and very interesting, because and one of the things I learned from that study I presented was really how extremely medically focused we are in our thinking about disability in Norway. So I would come into this child, it was classified with a learning problem. And they would say intellectual. I said, this is not intellectual, this is neurodivergent, this is trauma, this is, maybe it's intellectual, but these categorizing didn't exist. And in Norway, this categorizing makes a lot of sense, because we know if it's trauma from domestic violence, child protection authorities should come and remove that child from that home. That's how it's here. We know if it's intellectual, you may need other communicational teaching methods. We know if it's neurodevelopmental, this child may in fact have a very high IQ compared to the intellectually disabled child, and simply has a different learning style. Now, without the support system that we have in Norway, which makes diagnosis extremely important, because then that's the key that opens, the program of what happens next. Each teacher in an African classroom will sit down with this child, observe, okay, this kid has a learning problem, and then work from there. When the teacher is well-skilled and competent, that may even be better than the Norwegian solution, because these programmatic solutions in Norway does not take into account the enormous variability within each category. So sometimes beginning from scratch, I think, can even be a more practical approach, but it needs skills from the teacher and flexibility from the system surrounding the teacher. Thank you.
Wonderful. Please.
I couldn't agree more with those 6-year-old children in school having to learn, having to sit quietly, and then coming to Tanzania and then seeing children who are 3 and 4 sitting on a desk having to learn. And the parents, they are really expecting that this child will learn to read when they are 4. So I met children there who says, it's awful to go to school. Why do I have to learn these letters? But there has been a change. Now I've been to Tanzania back and forth for 7.5 years, and now they've taken away the chairs and the tables for those children, and they are starting playing. And with the master students, we have also had a lot of focusing on playing, because how are you learning? How is the brain developing? And of course, my way into it is the vision, but vision is occupying so much of the brain. And how can teachers develop the brain, the cognition, through playing? So we have been sitting on the floor playing a lot of stuff, and they had to reflect on what are we using now? How are we using our vision? How are we reflecting with our brains? And they are, wow. Oh, and they have been coming up with examples of how could we play and train this and train this. So I think to go into the material, what is learning? Because that ought to be the start for a teacher. And yes, you say we are very diagnosed focused and very connected to the health system. But what is then the teacher's role in this? And yeah, I think that is what we have to have on focus when we are teaching teachers to be teachers.
Fascinating. Any other response to what you've heard, please?
I could just...
Thank you, Anna. I thought that was a great question, and I will, we are in the same program, so I won't specifically answer that. But Anna Kjelland used a word that I didn't know actually, the listepasning. I've never heard that word, but I will use another Norwegian word I think is quite good, the ildsjel, a very enthusiastic person who gets stuff done. And we can't replicate those people. We can't replicate the most engaged mothers and fathers, but we can create the structures for that to happen, like Elisa explained earlier, and that you also had seen in northern Uganda with the school inclusion teams. So if we sort of create some formal structures around involvement of parents and families and guardians and siblings and everything, then we can sort of foment those things, at least to a certain extent. I just wanted to add that.
Excellent. Please, Elisa.
I just wanted to comment on this question about play-based learning and whether we need to, which I think is probably a very good question. But one of the question we are seeing coming out in the countries where we work is about the testing and how we see knowledge, like what knowledge we value, and this very prescribed idea about we need to test reading and math and it puts a lot of pressure, and it is probably it is a challenge when you are trying to include and make the room bigger in terms of that diversity, and that you have these. It's competitive thinking around schools, how they're performing, and you're trying to include a diversity which is often in conflict, and also using maybe that play-based approach to learning. So maybe we need to rethink how we assess or what knowledge we value, how we value development of children's learning.
Yeah. Runa, please.
Yeah, just a small comment on the debate in general, but also the thing about the social engagement. The discussion here is how, in a way, who is responsible, because we have examples also from the work we are doing now that students succeed in the educational system, despite not be this educational system isn't in a way based on the idea of inclusion. They succeed because they have the social support. So in your case, it was the father who felt responsible. In other situations, it can be peers that feels responsible to support, and that's in a way that's the real solution. If it takes inclusion seriously, that's in a way we can't buy inclusion. It has to be created as a value, and that's in a way what we are fighting. Different value systems.
Great, thank you so much. Anna, do you have something to add?
One sentence to that. Just supporting that. We had a large workshop in Niger where we invited kids who'd done well in school despite disabilities. And we had invited them to prepare something to say why they succeeded. We have this positive deviance approach to what we do. All 4 of them, no exception. The love of my mother. Everyone. So some supportive mother who had fought their way through that school in that community against probably a lot of resistance. Invaluable. So maybe we should support mothers a bit.
One way to go. Great. We still have some time to another round of questions, perhaps. We have one there. Mike is coming.
Thank you. Tom Searing, Human Rights Research League. I was wondering whether any of you have any data on the level and perhaps also quality of inclusion in education when it comes to refugee or IDP camps, if at all available in any of the countries or regions you're working in. Thank you.
Okay, we have a second question here, please.
Hi, my name is Mona Rasoul. From my background, I come from Egypt. I used to be a former assistant professor at Ain Shams University. It's a government university. I worked in child education department. I had a PhD in pedagogy, also cognitive and social psychology. I used to be involved in different various projects with Norwegian embassy in Cairo between Norway and Egypt. Culture education projects. To be shortcut, thank you first of all of this very valuable and important seminar. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the speakers. Yeah, I would just also, I feel responsible from my background to shed the light on this new approach of not only developing countries in Africa, but also these conflicts countries, which is, like he said, from not only perspective of human rights, but I think children from the Middle East with disabilities nowadays, it's a new challenge. For not only physical disability, but non-physical disability from mental and psychological perspective. If we are having this new approach, I think it will evolve many definitions and policy strategies for the scientific academic fields and sustainable development also. Thank you. Just I would like to highlight that we should focus about the children from the conflict countries. Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. Great. One more question, please, here.
Thank you very much. My name is Elijah Combat, and I represent the Northern Ghanaians Association. I was very happy to hear that some of you did some research in Ghana, and I was wondering whether the research was based only in the rural areas or in the cities or both, because the gap between the cities and the rural areas is really very great. One of us went home to Ghana and visited a school in the north. And it is a school for the deaf. And when he went there, he was visiting a friend, and they were looking at a small, something like pinhole screen camera, a TV. A school of about 400 children. And he came back here and told us that this was what he found out. So we are a small group. So we organized and bought a 50-inch TV and sent down to Ghana. When it came, the first problem was how to clear it from the ports. We met a problem with the authorities, but finally we got through. And now, ever since, we have been working with the school and helping them from time to time. Then we realized that the authorities actually neglect children with disabilities. And I want to find out from here if there are any NGOs who also have experience, who can share with us, especially me, so that we will also know how we can help our people down home. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Panelists? Okay, you have one. Anna, do you want to go first?
Maybe Huafong can answer something about the last.
Yeah. Ghana question to you, Huafong. If you can speak about the rural-urban disparities and Ghana issues.
Yeah, because it's mainly in the urban, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because our study is the schools that we have selected is in mainly in the center of Ghana.
Greater Kumasi area.
We include both urban and the rural area, but mainly still in the Kumasi areas. But we didn't go to Shanti region. So that's the sub-area we covered.
Good. And we have questions on data on disabilities and inclusion, particularly refugee settings. Perhaps any of you that you may have worked, Irene?
I'm sure Ellen has the good info on this too, but thank you for the question. It's very important, and there definitely is not enough data on inclusive education in emergencies, but there are many different entities that work on it, and including the ones that Norway support, like Education Cannot Wait, Global Partnership on Education, but it's still often you will find data from one area, or so there's not a lot of, as looking at Galahanda too, but there's not a lot of global data on the percentage of children with disabilities in emergencies who go to school. But there's definitely more and more focus on it. GP is also going to focus even more on it going forward. There was just the flagship report on disability and development by the UN was released recently, the 2024 one, which is the first one since 2018. When you read those kind of reports, you see that they pull data from many, we have this study from Vietnam, and then we have this study from Uganda. And so it's not where it should be, but there are things there. We're happy to chat later. And the same with the gentleman from Ghana. Would be happy to talk to you afterwards about the knowledge we have about that area. I don't know if you want to add.
I can briefly add of the assignment we have done, and it's really simple response. We found a lot of studies connected to South Sudan, Palestine, and Afghanistan on refugees, but this was ruled out. It's not a part of our report, so you do not need to look at the report for that kind of issue. So just for your information. But there are research on those areas, so it's quite easy to find. The second I just wanted to respond on is that the rural where the more domestic or more town areas, more populated situations. And it's the case of Nepal I'm referring to. In Nepal, there's about 130 different languages, and language matter. As vision matter, language matter. And what the ambitions of the education is high, so a lot of families move their kids from the rural areas into town, to the Kathmandu Valley. and they have their own language at home, and then they come to Kathmandu, where they go either to a public or a private school, where they have the more dominating language in use. And then to raise education, also all schools are encouraged to use English textbooks, introducing in third language for those kids. So that's just some descriptions of some of the challenges that are in play when we are talking about that contrast. It's probably the same in Africa and other regions as well.
Yeah, and then you also have the knowledge of how disabilities come. I mean, also out in small villages, they perhaps have more belief in witchcraft, like you mentioned. So there is also a lot of information needs to families and parents, so that they are not hiding away children, or that others are not threatening families with disabled children. So yeah, and that's also where I think teachers can do a difference also. If teachers have more knowledge, they can inform in societies, also in the smaller villages and areas.
Runa?
Yeah.
Just a response to the comment here on that government didn't invest in inclusive education or didn't care about disabled students, and that's a real thing. Because if you use the benefit cost model in education, it's not beneficial to invest in disabled students. And that's what I see also in the work we did, is that when we are competing about resources within the framework of inclusive education, disabled students lose towards gender, poverty, and race. Because they are invest in a way. If you invest in those three areas, you will get money back or resources back. But that's the challenge with the disabled students. But that's also what Solhjell said earlier today, that you can. It's by using disability as the main variable that you can challenge the educational system to see because if you use that and add that to inclusive education, you will in a way highlight the values of equity or what's the word? Equity and equality as in a way as a variable that is as important as the benefit cost model. And then you can really test out a system to see if it's really valuable, or what kind of values you really put into the educational system. And that's what, at least for my part, it's really interesting, because you're really challenging, as I said earlier, the values in inclusive education. But as long as we use the benefit cost model, disabled students will lose.
Yeah. Also, I think just to remind ourselves that also these are now conventional in international conventions that education is also a human right issue. So we also have different perspectives beyond the cost issues. Okay, we have 5 minutes for us to wrap up. Any final questions, remarks? We have one here and two. First.
Thank you very much. I'm Ragnhild Norvik from Norwegian Save the Children at Redd Barna. And thank you all. This has been a lot of brain candy. So I'm a social anthropologist, so I will definitely look for the SINTEF report. And I think you've highlighted so many interesting things. So as a final comment, I just want to, I think just building a bit on what Rune said, but also what Wafeng started by saying this morning, the quality of the, how we're able to have an inclusive education system is so closely linked with the quality of the education system, period. And in sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking like 7 out of 10-year-olds cannot read and write a single sentence. That's the quality of the education systems in many low-income countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're seeing constantly now, during the last couple of years, that more and more countries, again, sub-Saharan Africa, are spending more money on paying off debts than they do in investing in education and health. We see that big donors, Norway being one of them, is cutting on their education, global education aid. Maybe maintaining a bit with humanitarian education, but the needs are, exploding within the humanitarian sphere. And when it comes to more stable development countries, the aid is going down. So we need to do both. I mean, it's a big takeaway that Ellen says, yes, we need to focus specifically on disability inclusion, but we also cannot stop working for the quality of the entire education system, because there is no way of defining quality education that doesn't involve the word inclusive. And disability inclusive, but gender inclusive, gender identity, sexual orientation, refugee status, language group, ethnic group, etc., etc., etc. But what we do know, though, I mean, a bit building on what you say, Runa, is that if we have a very inclusive education system, it becomes a quality system for all. So rather than having this debate, should we or not, should we focus on children with disabilities as opposed to the majority, if we manage to have a good inclusive system, also for children with disabilities, it will most likely be a very good quality system for all children, regardless. So that's also, I mean, how can we use inclusive education as a way to build a good quality education system, rather than thinking, we need to do education for the majority and then have disability inclusion as an afterthought. And I think we have talked about some models here today that actually build on that, and I just think that's something we need to build on. But thank you all for the fruit candy, and I think you might have to explain listepostning to several of our people. It's just oldies who know it.
Excellent. And we have one more, and we'll wrap up the questioning. Titus?
Actually, you can erase me from your list. Thank you. You read my mind.
Titus and I are like this.
That was exactly what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Excellent. Now I think then we will let our panelists to have the final word of the day, the morning. Perhaps any remarks, reflections, or takeaways that you want to communicate. You'll have each very few seconds, minutes.
I can start off.
Rolf?
What I think we have discovered is that to make some kind of development, either in the general education sector or more specifically within disability, is to have and initiate a kind of national debate on how to approach a development of the education system, how you can use the ideas of inclusive education to as an engine to make something some changes that goes in some kind of direction. That means that specific project focusing on whatever it is, disability or hearing or whatever, is important. But without any national debate, they will unfortunately gradually be fading away. So you need to have some kind of debate, either with other organizations and the universities and also the state are involved. That was what I just emphasized, a national debate in the states to raise the quality of education.
Great. Any other fantastic point, Anna?
Bård, Vegard today talked about the necessity of being evidence-based. But I hope some of what I talked about today, but especially what Fafo talked about today, is that although we gather a lot of research, cross-country statistics, we have to remain humble. 17.4%. What does it really mean? What does it mean in Zimbabwe? What does it mean in Ghana? Possibly two very different things. So it looks very nice to put up these statistics and percentages, but we need to remain humble that we still don't know exactly what it means. And we need to stay curious to understand where data comes from.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for this, because I think it has been a very, very good day and things have been connected so very well. But when I sit here and will do a reflection, perhaps first of all, from my own point of view, and I'm thinking, yes, I started also with a dream. What should we manage in Tanzania? And now we are coming to the end of nearly 8 years, and I'm an old lady, and I'm not going to follow it further. And I have to let it go. And I think that's also something we have to learn. that yes, we are starting somewhere. We don't know where to go, but when we have gone together with someone, we have to let them go. And I feel now that there are so many teachers who have learned something new in Tanzania, and they are owning something new, and they are sharing it with others. And the Tanzanian Institute of Education are sharing it. They are having conferences, they are making courses, they are doing a lot of stuff, and they don't always inform me at all. They are doing it on their own. And I'm thinking sometimes, oh, but they could have done it in this way or this way. No, I have to let them go and do it in their way. They are now owning it. And I think we sometimes need to think about that yes, it's not we owning it. They have to own it and let go.
Great, thank you. Any other remarks?
I would also like to appreciate the forum. It was very interesting and useful, and I really appreciate your comment from Save the Children. I wanted to actually I read one of Rune's papers who compares inclusive education to concepts like democracy and freedom of speech, and I think it speaks to the fact that it isn't something you can do in a short time. You really need these discussions, not just here, but in country, like Rune was saying, and that it is a long-term, something you really have to invest in over a long period of time to see happen. And it's the same for quality, that really is an investment over a long period of time, but discussions like this.
Great, thank you. Final word, Rune?
I'm not sure. I'm not right person to say this. And I think we might all be biased here, but at least the debate today, I think, has proven that education matters. And that's also my, feedback to Norad and so on when you're doing your budget dispositions. that because we are fighting with all the areas. And I think that is important, and that's our responsibility to really to highlight how important education is, and that it's a lot more about more than just getting some students to learn something. It is about changing societies.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. We give a round of applause to our panelists and presenters today. I think I want to really express my heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers and the panelists and also the participants for your valuable contributions. I think the insights we shared today, I believe, reminds us that achieving inclusive education requires collaboration, partnership, creativity, and also sustained commitment from us all. So let's carry forward these discussions to drive meaningful action in our respective fields. And thank you all for being part of this important dialogue. And I wish you all a wonderful day. And we have some presents to our panelists.
Thank you very much.